Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on Ergo Healthy Topics, Office Ergonomics, the Basics and Beyond, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Deb Beto, and I will be your moderator today and be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL that's currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. If you have audio difficulties or a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Please feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, and then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenter will be answering questions during the presentation. And lastly, we have a number of webinars upcoming covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we offer the mandatory preventing harassment training in English 3 times a year. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Ergo Healthy Topics, Office Ergonomics, the Basics and Beyond. Today's interactive session will be facilitated by Steve Thompson. Steve integrates a holistic approach to workplace safety. For the past 20 years, he has been actively consulting, teaching, and coaching safety, ergonomics, and risk management. He has served in various capacities, including risk manager, safety and health manager, and business development coach and facilitator. He is the co-author of Workplace Safety, a guide for small and mid-sized companies. And he is co-author of both safety and ergonomics chapters in Foundation for Optimal Productivity, a DMEC publication, and also Tools of the Trade, another DMEC publication. Earlier in his career, Steve served in the Air Force as a medic and later worked as an emergency room nurse, LVN. In addition to his role at Aspen Risk Management Group, he is involved with several charitable causes, including the Insurance Industry Charitable Foundation, the IICF. I'm now going to turn my screen over to Steve. Excuse me here. And we will start our presentation.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I was looking for the make me the presenter, and I think that's coming up. It's great to be here, and this has been a 12-year relationship with the Heffernan team and working with them in doing presentations. And I'm just awaiting a moment, Deb. I think I'm the other organizer, so.
Okay. Let me see.
That's it. Oh, almost. You took it back.
Yeah.
Goes to your other organizer. Yeah, it goes to the other one. So while Deb is working on moving that screen over to me, that'll take just a moment. It's back to the moderator. That's not the, it's not here yet, but just there's 2 organizers. So I'm one of them, and you're one of them.
Have it now. You should have it now.
It's
it's
not
showing...
yet. Not yet. I'll let you keep working on it while I talk, but I'll let you know as soon as I see it come up. Now it's coming up. There it is. Okay, everyone. Great. Now I get to show my screen. Thank you, Deb.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So 12 years I've had this great opportunity to work with Heffernan and be a part of the webinar series. And for those of you that have been on webinars in the past, you know that each time we bring an ergonomic webinar, we bring some new information, we bring updates that are happening in the world, equipment updates, things of that nature. And I have some interesting things to report in just a moment, and I'll look forward to that. But Deb, we have a polling question that we always like to ask right on the front end. And we'd love to get everybody's knowledge of ergonomics in the office. Can you put that polling question out?
The polling question is up. So how would you rate your office ergonomic safety knowledge? Are you an awesome expert, average, could use some improvement, not much at all, or not sure? And I always like to wait till we have about 80% of the people that are responding. So please be sure to participate in this portion of the presentation. And Steve, we have almost 80% responded. 9% say they are an awesome expert. 46% say average. 36% could use some improvement. 11% not much at all, and 0% are not sure.
Well, thank you, Deb. I appreciate that, and we can always share those results if you wanted to with the group so they can see them, and if not, that's okay. I'm going to reach out to you, awesome experts, as we go along. If there's some information you think is valuable to the audience, please share it. And for those of you with the 41 to 46% of average strength, please add in also. This is a group event, so let's make it that way. I think as you have probably seen before, this presentation has changed over the years as we've learned more information. And I'll go through just a couple of points here that are kind of critical to look at. Prolonged standing, there has been a lot of research done over a couple of generations about standing jobs versus sitting jobs. We know that inactivity can definitely cause physical changes in people. And there are prolonged sitting studies, mostly out of Australia, showing increases of certain diseases in women. And there's our famous Bee Gees, of course, Staying Alive. That is a song to remember when you're doing CPR. Just remember that, CPR, Bee Gees, Staying Alive. That's just a little added value to the presentation. Why do companies look at ergonomics? Well, 40% of all work comp costs are musculoskeletal injuries, and they could be from lifting, moving, working on computers, etc. And many companies do studies on how to limit their exposures to these musculoskeletal injuries. Accenture and Cisco both did pilot studies of 10,000 employees, 5,000 each, to learn about the loss of productivity that discomfort or musculoskeletal disorders that are causing discomfort, even if it's a painful shoulder, back, elbow, wrist, hip, about the time that people pull off of their jobs and what they do. And their studies were less about how to deal with workers' comp cases. It was more about how to deal with lost productivity. When ergonomic interventions are put into place, there's definitely an improvement. But why do we look at office ergonomics? First, it's sedentary. And we know that sedentary is not so great in some environments. It's not typically identified as, quote, high hazard, like construction or truck driving or mining or otherwise. I mean, let's face it, it doesn't rise that high on the list of what's very dangerous, mining. And we also look at it for a couple of other reasons. What really is remote work today? You're riding in home from work, you're a passenger, you're in a carpool, you're whatever, and you're looking at your phone and you're checking emails. Are you working at that time? There's been a true just proliferation of social networking and communication going on in ways that were not in the past. And of course, we have gaming, which is a pretty popular. I'll go through some statistics in a moment. But first, I want to talk to you about a study that just It came out last year, but it's gaining a lot of press today. And I thought I'd touch on it real quickly so that everybody recognizes it. I think the headlines on CNN and the other popular press were horns are growing out of people using cell phones. And when you go back and you look at the actual study that was done and scientific reports, it was 1,200 people, and they were all patients at this particular chiropractic center. And this particular protrusion that was occurring in the back of the neck has actually been occurring in humans going back thousands of years. Now, there could be that there are tensions or other parts of our posture that may be affecting this. So my point to showing this particular piece is that you will sometimes have employees coming forward and saying, hey, I've just read about this ball chair, or I've just read about sit stand, or I just read about this study on this particular thing. We need to do something about it. It's always important to find out where the research comes from and who sponsored it and what is the point of the research. So do I think that there may be something from this? We do know that postures have been changing, and we'll talk about that. And that generally takes about 600 years from a biological perspective to actually physically change people. We've learned through that, through lactose intolerant people, et cetera, et cetera. It may happen in less years, but we've typically found this to occur in that period of time. Technology is relatively new for us, especially phone use, which only goes back, regular everyday phone use only goes back about 50 years. So we don't know if there is an increase in this, but I say we can keep an eye on it, but I would not panic or go starting to buy everything. Besides, a lot of people don't use their phones any longer to talk. They're mostly texting or doing other types of things on them. When you do a quick search in Google for sitting and killing, etc., you'll see a number of articles that get published over various years that sitting can kill you. And be very cautious and look at who has designed the studies. The unfortunate part is many of the studies have been sponsored by furniture manufacturers, those companies that create devices to help people in the workplace. Many of the studies that are unbiased do not show that sitting is killing people. There are some studies that show that sedentary lifestyles are dangerous to us, and that's a differentiation between sitting at work and sitting at home versus sitting in cars versus having an overall sedentary life. So just be very attuned to the research. And again, employees will come to you and talk about this. You're always welcome to reach out to Ergo Healthy coaches here on behalf of Heffernan, or reach out to your broker and they can put us in touch with us. We're more than happy to provide the real research that's going on, the unbiased. More evidence that sitting too much can kill you, and there are some studies that were done over the past 20 years of people who watch 4 to 6+ hours of television every day may have higher incidence of early death. But the unfortunate part is that there are many parts of the study that are not evaluated. They pull out one piece, which is the sitting, but they may not take out the piece why people are sitting. Are they more obese? Do they have already pre-existing conditions? So we do agree that a sedentary lifestyle can be unhealthy. To what degree it affects work? Well, not as much today, because many jobs people do get up and take breaks every hour, and that's the recommended approach to dealing with a sedentary lifestyle. We'll talk about that in a little bit more on that later. Ergonomic origins, I think we've talked about this before with the team, but the term ergonomics comes from the Greek words ergon, meaning work, and nomos, meaning laws, so the laws of work. Ergonomics came about through a number of findings, including the pyramids, of course, but in modern times, it really came about for ejection seats and how to get pilots out of the plane safely. We've had all sorts of writings and changes over the years. Many of you may have read The Jungle, which is a 1906 novel written by Upton Sinclair about the industrialized cities and how the workers were in those environments, and the things that we learned, like that ergonomic knife for cutting chickens open and doing other types of butchering, made it easier on people's shoulders and backs. The office has changed quite a bit too. We've moved from typewriters, manual typewriters, and even those are newer typewriters at the top, to electric typewriters, to keyboards, laptops, smartphones, other types of devices. Age breakdown of our video game players in the U.S. This hasn't changed in 2019. You can see the numbers there. 58% of Americans do game a game, and this is the breakdown of those gamers. And it's pretty even actually among folks, although 18 to 35-year-olds are in there. My question, it's rhetorical, and that is, does having health insurance improve healthy behavior? And I usually will ask the question yes, no, or not sure, but for time purposes, I'm just going to move past this and just answer the question for you. And unfortunately, does having health insurance improve healthy behavior? No, it actually worsens it based on the studies. Does it reduce obesity rates? No, unfortunately, it increases obesity rates. And C, does it improve safe behavior? No, unfortunately, it increases unsafe behavior. These studies go back to the 1970s when economists first started to look at this. These were Nobel laureates, Kenneth Arrow and Gary Becker. They argued over this topic between 1962 and 1972, and then there have been a number of studies done in the U.S. Now, most of these studies have to come out of states where data is collected in one spot. And places like Oregon and Washington that have sort of state-funded workers' compensation systems, state-funded healthcare systems, California does too, where they can take a look at Medicaid, or in those states, other names for them, coming on and off those things. And just for instance, some of the statistics that came out of people with healthcare versus people without healthcare, men in particular increased their risky health behaviors. Physical activity dropped by 40%, cigarette smoking increased by 16%, and drinking alcohol with regularity increased by 32%. Now, it's believed that the thinking is that by having health insurance, health coverage, that you could lead a slightly riskier life because you're going to have medical care to take care of you. All right. That leads us, though, to what about technology and engineering? And the reason we talk about health insurance and we talk about all of these factors, does engineering and technology reduce collision rates, automobile rates? And unfortunately, all this new technology that we have, and I'm applying it to ergonomics in a moment, has not really reduced our frequency rate of collision. And partially, we know now that there's distractions in some of the equipment that we've put in vehicles, whether they be touch screens, other devices that people operate while the car's in motion. There's new dials that read out different types of information. So we're in a unique place as it relates to technology. What technology has done, though, is it has reduced fatalities. So the frequency rate has not really been impacted in any dramatic way. If we look out into the 2020 and perhaps 2030, we may see that autonomous driving may reduce collision claim frequencies, but that's pretty much on the horizon out 25 to 30 years. And we may see some changes in that, and we may see claim frequencies drop because of that. So are we actually driving safer? No, not at all, not for a long time. Are we reducing death rates by driving? Yes, we are. Airbags, other types of safety devices are working, definitely. So in modern times, how about engineering and technology as it relates to computers? Well, we've moved from a desk to workstations. We moved from typewriters to PCs to tablets, smartphones, etc. Metal chairs that maybe were a little hard to sit on, and then padded chairs versus now we have very inexpensive ergonomic chairs and very expensive ergonomic chairs. Small ergonomic equipment like footrests and anti-fatigue mats and sit-stand workstations and all the other stuff that goes into it. Are we really seeing an improvement in ergonomic injury rates with engineering technology? And the unfortunate part is we're seeing an increase. The technology of computers, the technology of smartphones, the technology of wrist wearing, wearables, et cetera, have not improved our ergonomic injury rates at all. They've actually made them worse. We'll talk about how to offset some of those in a moment. I always like to talk about this, about what's happening, talking about technology and what's changing. Yeah, I think most of you on this call may already recognize that some of these things are fast going away. VCR is no longer made past 2017. Some of you are saying, what's a VCR? Sure, things like cash and checkbooks. Checkbooks going away, certainly if you're into digital coins like Bitcoin and others. You'll see that Facebook's coming out with Libra. 2.5 to 3 billion people may have access to that digital currency. There'll be some regulatory issues to overcome, but being able to very quickly throughout the blockchain be able to exchange money instantaneously between people and business, going to be pretty remarkable. And those types of things are coming into place, and these other things are going away. It's just happening, and that's what technology does. Remote work is changing too. People can work more remotely today because of different types of servers, devices. Just take a look at some of the factors here. And telework, at least number 2 bullet, is described by companies as 1 day per week or something like that. So there's the survey on workplace flexibility has certainly been monitoring this change, and it'll probably fluctuate between different companies. You know, Google had pulled people out of the remote work environment, bringing them back into the offices for various reasons. Amazon has done some of that. So we'll probably see transition between doing some remote work, some in-office work, more flex work, especially that the economy in the U.S. is on an incredible pace right now. Very little unemployment, very little people out of work, those that want to work. So we're going to probably continue to see some sort of flex as a benefit to entice people to actually come to work and be a part of a team. And there's this melding of work and non-work activities, and I think many of you on this call probably deal with this from a work comp perspective. When is it that a person is working any longer? And I think if employees have email on their phones, their tablets, their laptops, and they're plugging in, while they're on the weekends or otherwise to stay ahead, hey, trust me, it happens to a lot of folks. It's part of what we are today. We're a very productive country. We work very hard. Still the most productive country in the world. And these are the kinds of things that we figure out how to do. And by having email and other ways of communication easily accessible at all times of the day, it blurs some lines. And we do see this blurring of the melding in work and non-work activities. So important to think about it. It's just something that we have to keep in the back of our mind about how we deal with people who are, quote, injured on the job that may have a repetitive motion injury, and how did that happen and how did that come about. How much time do we really spend at work? Well, traditional work is a 40-hour to 50-hour work week. Many of you on this call probably work 60 to 80. Some of you may work part-time. Whatever the hours are, the problem in ergonomics for many, many years has been that we have been isolated to just identify the 24% of what a person does in their life. So I mean experts that do ergonomic evaluations, or those that have been trained to do them at your companies, they'll say, well, we're going to look at the workstation. And you know what? That's okay. But if you don't address the 76% of the person's other parts of their life, you end up with a very limited ability to actually fix problems for people that are having repetitive motion injuries. I'd say clearly 30 to 40% of the ergonomic evaluations that we do, and we do thousands a year, it's a combination. It's not just work. If you don't touch on the things, UCLA has some studies that show this very clearly. Cornell is a leader in ergonomics, mostly for office, but they do some industrial. If you don't touch on the things that are away from work, you're in a jam, because you're not going to be able to fix a person just because you move their mouse or raise their monitors. You're going to have to make sure that you're addressing anything else that may be causing it. And it's common stuff. The person does a lot of knitting. They play the guitar. They're a pianist. They love to work on engines on the weekend. They do a lot of housework and cleaning. They flip homes on the weekend. You name it. They love doing dishes. They love playing with their kids. They love lifting weights. It doesn't matter. All those factors can come into place for repetitive motion injuries. So how do we fix some of this stuff? Well, first we start in an office environment with getting the seats right. And notice there's no armrests on these chairs. That's the first thing you got to remove. That helps build the core in people. If you've got seats in your office of the style that doesn't have removable armrests, you need to go on some sort of planning budget over the next few years and get rid of all those chairs that the armrest cannot be removed. That's number one. So if you want to fix a lot of problems in the office, you got to start with that. A, they will prevent people from moving close enough to their desk to work in good ergonomic postures. B, when we go in to see people sitting in chairs with armrests, they might be leaning to one side or the other. There are problems that can be developed on the elbows, just sort of like it's not an abrasion, but over time will cause a problem in the bone because of the pressure that's created from the armrest. Doesn't matter what the armrest is made out of. It could be sheepskin and it would still be the same thing. So in most cases we're recommending, and again, not all cases, because people may need the armrest to help them rise. Now they've got to be cautious with that because the chairs are on rollers. So it's going to be the rare case where armrests will be left on chairs. Now, you'll see many expensive chairs, ergonomic chairs, being sold with very fancy armrests, very adjustable, many different categories. You probably want a chair, and we have lists of chairs that we've vetted over the years that look a lot like this chair, and they can be picked up at big box retailers, in the $100 to $150 range, with 10-year to lifetime warranties that will serve the absolute best purpose for ergonomics. And that's heavy work, 8 to 12 hours a day if somebody needs to do that kind of job. The $1,200, the $1,500, the $900 chairs that get advertised, apologies to those on the call that might be from one of those companies that sells those chairs, or maybe you've had to buy them for aesthetic purposes. That happens too. Just make sure those chairs are the right chairs for the size of the people that are using them, and you're probably going to be okay. But they're not necessary today. There may be some studies out, but be cautious to look where the studies come from and who has sponsored them. Start with the chair. Next comes some simple steps. This is a basic workstation setup. You can see how simple it really is. Not necessary for anything grand in particular. This puts a comfortable workspace for a person. This is all going to be in a handout that comes to everyone afterwards. So we're just going to go through this very, very quickly about some of the things and the adjustments that are best to do. Very difficult to use a smartphone, and more difficult to use a tablet in a good ergonomic posture. And I guess that leads to sort of the question, what working posture are you in right now? And Deb, can you put that question up for me? I know it's out of order, but could you pull that question up? Which working posture are you in right now?
Yes.
Thank you.
So which working posture are you in right now? You are either sitting upright, sitting declined with a forward tilt, sitting reclined, standing, or other.
We got some people standing. Wow. I'm impressed. Well, that's at this moment. Maybe you only stood up for this moment. That's okay.
That's okay.
We have nobody laying down.
We have nobody laying down, and not sure what other would mean, but
yeah,
actually,
on their head.
We do have 17% sitting reclined, 17% sitting declined, 4% standing, 62% sitting upright.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Deb. And thank you, everyone, for participating. Hopefully no one is...
I was going to say there's some other polling questions that we missed. Do you want to go through those?
No, I'm going to get them in a minute.
Okay, got it.
Yep, I'm going to get them in a minute. Thank you. So take a look at those postures on the left. All you have to do is go anywhere, any restaurant, any place, and take a look at your fellow Americans and see how they're sitting and using their devices. I would say that you're not going to be able to fix that in the world probably, but if you have children, if you have yourself, if you have family members, if you've got friends, you might want to talk with them about this. This is going to cause some long-term problems. So let's try to address it where we can. Start with yourself. We know the change is difficult. You may have been contemplating it for a long time, but see what you can do about improving your own postures and pass that on to your children, friends, family, and others, and it'll be a good start. For those of you that run HR, safety, risk, ergonomics programs for your company, one of the best things you can do is put a comprehensive ergonomics program into place so that you can stop these types of things from happening in the workplace. Okay. I wanted to cover that. Went through my slides very, very quickly. And then there's alternative methods, of course, using the voice texting features. Many people use that now. That's very common. Tablets are very difficult to work ergonomically with. They're just incredibly difficult devices to work with. You can put them on a stand. You can adjust them in ways that you're in a more upright position. That's the goal. They make devices where you can lay down on your back and the tablet can be held in a device held over you. There are tools for this, but it is again a difficult device to use from an ergonomic perspective. You can also use things like tapping lightly on the screen so that you don't get into a problem using it, with a heavy hand or heavy fingers. Now, I'd like to ask some questions about what you see in these next photos. And if you'd like to put some things in your chat box, you certainly can, or your question box, depending on what you're listening to. If you are on a tablet or you're on a smartphone, you may have to tap it to actually get your question or chat box. But I'll read off in a moment here what we see. But if in that first picture in the left-hand side, which shows this person standing in their workstation, and that's a sit stand, that desk goes up and down. The company had put sit stand in because they felt that that was a really good start for that person and they really get them in good shape. But what are some of the problems that you see there?
And please feel free to use your chat box or questions box, and I will be reading off the answers as you respond.
So that's the one I want people to look at, is the left-hand picture and see what they see in that photo. What might they do to correct some of those circumstances? And we're going to see the close eyes of our audience.
So one participant says there's no 90-degree angle in the arm.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Another one says they're standing on a hard surface. Another one says they're having to look down at the monitor.
Ooh, look at the monitor, yes.
Computer is too low. The knees seem to be locked. Severe neck angle caused by the screen height.
Yes.
So some good
Those are
perks. Some good.
excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Those are excellent. So a couple of other points on this. So yes, it is good to have a couple of things. One would be a very thin anti-fatigue mat. There is carpet here, but we don't know how thick the carpet is. So having a thin anti-fatigue mat. Also using a footstool, right, folks? So you want to alternate putting your feet, the left foot to the right foot. If any, I know that there aren't many on the call that have ever been to a bar before, but for those of you that have been to a bar, what's one of the things that you feel down on the floor when you go right up to a bar? There's usually a pole that goes across there where you can rest your foot. Well, early bartenders were very smart. They knew that you'd stay a lot longer if you could transfer your weight between one foot on the bar and then transferring to the other. It released pressure in the lower back. So having a footstool or something to rest one foot on and resting the other. The other problem for this person is that their feet, their toes are turned out quite a bit. It's probably because their weakness in their some of the muscles that are in the hip area, and that's a problem that comes from this particular type of lifestyle. So everyone's very correct. You can see the extreme angles that are being created on the wrist. You can see the problems in the elbow. You can see the problems. There's no footstool, the locked knees, the no anti-fatigue mat, and then the chair itself has armrests. So when the person's coming into the desk, they're probably not able to get in there. And it's also a curved desk, which might be okay, but we're not 100% sure. These are easier to see. Obviously, many people don't talk this way anymore, but some still do. Good things to keep an eye on. Here we have a person that's got work on the, got a good start here with the document holder, but then uses their legs for a document holder. Got an ergonomic keyboard, but keyboard trays typically are not the best solution for many work environments. Look how little the mouse area is to use, and you really don't want to freeze people up into a tiny little mouse area. Here's a guy that's a little too upright. He also uses a ball chair, which is what he's sitting on now. This will cause some fatigue for this gentleman. He's also got his elbows and his forearms on a sharp edge of a desk. So those are the things that are relatively easy to look for, and again, we'll be providing this presentation. It's easy to see this one here, of course, with the circle around it, but what many people will miss is the watch. And we find a lot of people now wearing specialty watches, whether they be smartwatches or other wearable devices, and even jewelry. And that can put pressure on those very sensitive tendons and ligaments in that arm, in the wrist area. So you want to remove jewelry, watches, while you're working on a keyboard if you're working in this particular manner with if you like your wrist down. Not everybody does. Unfortunately, this person had a lot of problems in their right shoulder, and that was because of this incredibly bad posture. And you can see how it works for them. Not very, very positive there in that position. So sit, stand, and standing work. Let me ask the next question, and that is, Deb, if you'll run question number 5 about sit, stand workstations and healthier. Can you run that?
All right. Here we go. Are sit, stand workstations healthier than sitting? It's either yes, no, or not sure. There's not that many responses here, so I want to see 100% of the people voting this time. I realize that some of you are probably sharing screens though, so I'll wait until we get up to about 80%. And Steve, 45% say yes, 28% say no, and the rest are not sure.
Well, thank you, Deb, and thank you very much, audience. And if you haven't guessed by now, after all the stuff that we've talked about previously, you're right. There's some confusion around this, and those of you that answered not sure, you're probably as accurate as anybody else that's answered this. For those that answered yes, we'll share some studies with you that may help you think, not help you, but may give you cause to think a little differently. For those that answered no, you're probably right on right now about the fact that they don't make a healthier environment, and there's a number of reasons for that. But let's talk about this for a moment, and we've already talked about some of the health outcomes. Standing workstations, if we go back to the very first slide that we had, standing workstations and prolonged standing will increase heart disease. We've looked at factory workers for many, many years, people that stand predominantly on their feet, and they have everything from varicose veins to other types of disorders that happen from that, and they do indeed have an increase in heart disease. Those studies are triple blind. They are more in depth. They do show that there are some challenges with standing workstations. Sitting requirements. Now, for those of you that are in California, let's remember, and we can close that. Oh, did you close that poll already? Thank you. Thank you, Deb. In California, we have an odd law that requires that jobs have a seat. And so if you provide a person a standing desk or a sit-stand desk and they don't sit, you might be in violation of some of the wage order laws. And it's just important to remember that we are the only state that has an ergonomic standard. We're the only state that has a sitting requirement for jobs. So be aware of those types of standards that exist. For those of you outside of California, well, I don't know if a sitting requirement is of value. It's been used more so for jobs that are standing that require some sort of sitting arrangement. Isn't that odd? We go to a job where it's a sedentary job and many people want a standing workstation. We go to the jobs where the people stand most of the time, where the problems occur, and they're required to have a sitting requirement. It's the reverse in each work environment. The best thing to do is to have a sitting job and to be able to stand every 45 to 1 hour for about 5 minutes and get stretches and exercises in, but we'll get to that in a minute. Unfortunately, for those studies that have been done on sit-stand and standing workstations right now, the Board of Ergonomics and Industrial Hygienists, there is no benefit to a sit-stand workstation. Unfortunately, the studies that have been done, many have been sponsored, unfortunately, or influenced by furniture manufacturers. A Canadian study was done a few years ago, and it turned out that the researcher, although he was from a major Canadian university, he unfortunately was invested in an ergonomics company making sit-stand workstations. We're not saying that sit-stand is not healthier or unhealthier. There's just no proof to show that it's one way or the other. The best approach to working in a workstation that's a sedentary job is to get up and move around. Sitting did not increase mortality risk. 16-year study done by the International Journal of Epidemiology in 2015. This was done. This was a vigorous study that was done based on, it's called the Whitehall 2 study in London, based on government workers. Previous studies related to overall health versus associated sitting time. Sitting burns 80 calories per hour, standing 88. You'll see people say, oh, you can burn so many more calories by standing. Not really. That's about a couple of sticks of celery. But there are health benefits from the transition. As a matter of fact, many of the studies, and even NIOSH is starting to catch up, the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health, are starting to talk about integrating exercise with sedentary jobs. And we'll have more on that in a little bit. We want to thank Canada for their study on 7,300 participants in the labor market that participated. Remember, Canada is a unified healthcare plan, and so the study of its people and study of its health is a little different. It's like China. Many of you read the Chinese studies on diet. Those studies can be done on very large populations of people because of the types of healthcare systems they have. So in Canada, over 12 years, 7,300 participants were involved in this particular study, and those who did predominantly stood for work were associated with a twofold risk of incident of heart disease compared with those in seated jobs. So we want to thank Canada for taking this lead and getting this research on the right path so that we have real research that's being done on the types of healthy ways to stay healthy in sedentary jobs. Well, now what do you do? Now we have a difficult scenario because we have a lot of employees asking for sit-stand. As a matter of fact, it's probably one of the leading questions when we do our remote ergonomics evaluations. Our leading coaches, have to deal with this on a regular basis. The company facilities manager has determined that sit-stand is the best way to go. They've read some articles in the popular news, or they've pulled out a couple studies and said, that's true. I even got a letter from a doctor and a chiropractor for a company that we had not recommended sit-stand, and they came back with some studies. And there was a hand surgeon in Washington and a couple of other studies that they had been citing for the reasons that the person had to have sit-stand, even though they had some very serious problems with standing. So we just have to be cautious in what we do. And I do have my next question. Deb, I'd like to ask the question of the group, how do you approve a standing or sit-stand request? So for those of you that have this type of system at your company, if you can pose that question, that would be great. And Deb is posting the question, how do you approve a standing or sit-stand request? And a note from a doctor, a note from a healthcare professional, recommendation from ERGO professional, no special review, already provided company-wide, and other not sure. So let's just give it a moment here.
We have about 66% of the people voting. We're going to wait till a couple more people vote here. And so, Steve, it looks like about 50% say a note from a doctor. 32% note from a healthcare professional, like a physical therapist, chiropractor, trainer. 24%
like Chuck Norris,
recommendation from Ergo Healthy Professional. 37% say no special review, just an automatic approval, and the other 11% are not sure.
Okay, all right, very good, thank you. So really all over the place, isn't it, folks? And this is part of the confusion in the industry, and this is part of the confusion that goes on. You can have experts that will believe in one way very clearly, maybe they had personal experience by using sit-stand and having a remarkable outcome. The unfortunate part of sit-stand is that only 19% of the people that actually receive a sit-stand will create behavior change, meaning that their standing time per se may increase other than if they had just been sitting and then taking their normal breaks by standing, whether they go to the copier, whether they get up to use the restroom, whether they go and get water, whether or not they purposely build an application in on their phone or otherwise to get up and stand and stretch for 2 minutes. But either way, we'll keep on moving because it's important for us to discuss the topic. So some of the workstation challenges that we face on a daily basis is I need an ergonomic workstation with sit-stand for health reasons. And as we just discussed, how is this given? Is it just provided with no questions asked? Do you ask for documentation from a healthcare provider? Now, I'm going to ask the question from those of you that had the 45% and the 30%, which is about 70+%. Do you ask the doctor to provide a guidance on the sit-stand? And what kind of guidance do they actually provide? Because we will many times ask the doctor to clarify, well, how often should they sit and how often should they stand? And many times they'll pull out some of the Canadian studies and say, well, they should be standing X% of the time and sitting X% of the time. They rotate it back and forth. So we ask questions like, well, how often should they use their mouse on the right hand versus their left? You've told us that they have a shoulder problem and a back problem, so how often should they be rotating between the right and left hand? Okay. How often should they actually be sitting for any length of period of time, and how long should they be standing? What size anti-fatigue max should they be using? What size footstool should they be using? How often should they rotate their foot, left and right, between the footstool? Now, these are questions if someone's going to be recommending a sit-stand workstation when people are standing, working on a computer. All those answers should be provided. Now, most doctors and healthcare providers struggle with this because they're not reading the research. They are making the recommendations based on what many doctors do. They have a salesperson who comes by the office and says, this drug is a great drug. You need to prescribe it. It will do these things. It will reduce blood pressure. It will reduce weight, and it will improve a person's health unmistakably. So be cautious, folks, that when you do get some medical information that the doctor says this person requires sit-stand, make sure you know how that's supposed to be set up, and make sure you know how often they're supposed to be doing things. If you don't have parameters around that, then you're facing a huge gap. And probably the gap is they should be sitting. The best thing to do is probably bring in an ergo person, a professional, that can at least evaluate the job. And if you've pulled in an ergonomics professional who is also working for a furniture manufacturer or an ergonomic equipment manufacturer, well, be cautious with the outcomes of that also, because we work, our company works independently. We don't provide any equipment. We work independently to review what equipment might be the best. All right. All right, you get the doctor's note for the sit-stand, and you've also got to take into consider all of the other factors, especially in California. Is this accommodation? Is this actually accommodation? Is this an ADA issue? And how do you deal with this if it is ADA? What about the standard ergo assessment? Did the doctor take into consider the ANSI Standard 100? Do they actually understand what the person does? Do they have a job description? Do they know that they use Microsoft Outlook and PowerPoint and some accounting program, or they use spreadsheets all day? These are all factors that a doctor's note should take into consideration in assigning a person the type of work. Do they understand the California Standard on Wage and Hour and the requirement for sitting? All right. So if you have to have this and it's agreed that a sit-stand is going to be there, let's take a look at some of the things in advance. First of all, you got to make sure that your seated workstation is appropriate. Most likely no armrest, most likely some sort of education, whether it's online or otherwise, sort of a sheet, a reminder education, probably at least annually with employees after they've come on the job. Give them the chance so that they understand how to make the chair adjustments. We come across many cases where employees are not even familiar with how to make the adjustments to the chair so that it's seated properly. And make sure they understand how to make other workstation adjustments, how to rotate their mouse between the right and left hand. If you've given them a ball mouse that doesn't transfer between the right and left hand and only works on the right hand, now granted, graphic designers, artists, people that do that type of work probably aren't going to be rotating their mouse. There are other opportunities between standing and moving, certainly just walking to places, having standing meetings, maybe instead of sitting all the time, making sure you drink plenty of water, so you got to run to the restroom. And there are some exceptions to sit-stand. We have found that there are some rare medical conditions that would require somebody to stand more than sit. Could be pain related to a medical condition. I'm talking real pain that's related to a real medical condition. They do exist. The doctor should identify that in the note, not the condition, because we're dealing here with privacy. Now remember, there is no HIPAA in workers' comp. So if this is a case that's already been filed with workers' comp, remember that under workers' comp, generally speaking, you get information. If it's pre-workers' comp or it's healthcare related, and of course that's HIPAA protected, you're not going to know what's going on. And then make sure that there isn't an inability to change postures, because a person sitting should be able to fidget, move, sit on the edge of the chair, sit in the back, sit sideways, up and down, whatever. That's what you want. When they're standing, they should have a footstool, anti-fatigue mat, be able to move closer, move back, have the monitors adjust. All those factors are important if you're going to go sit-stand. There's some traditional sit-stand desks. This is a sit-stand study that you will see the results of, unfortunately unproven. If you do have to have sitting only, and you've been convinced a little bit that maybe sit-stand is not the way to go, maybe you're not 100% sure, make sure that these things are being done for seated workstations. About every 20 to 30 minutes, take a posture break. That doesn't mean necessarily always standing or always taking a break from work. Could mean just adjusting in the seat. It could mean just standing sort of in a crouching manner. Could be flexing your legs, your muscles in your legs. And it's important to have movement for blood circulation. Cornell has some sit-stand guidance. This is in your package, so you'll get it in the follow-up email. This gives you an idea. If you're going to do sit-stand, these are the types of recommendations that come out. This is what the doctor should be recommending. There should be no studies that are being done by a single doctor out of Canada who says, you have to do X percent. If you're going to do it, then do it by the way that the research indicates. So if you're going to do sit-stand, make sure that it's done in a way that's at least backed up by science and by the best in the industry. Cornell right now has one of the best. All right. There are other methods, all sorts of applications that people can wear to help them remind them of posture, whether it's sitting or standing, and all sorts of things are available, and I'm going to just send them through. If you start to bend forward, you have a little sensor that goes off on your phone that says, hey, you need to sit up straight. There are even monitors being designed that will watch posture and help people sit better. There's a couple tools for health that I've put in here. There are, of course, the break reminders. I've got a couple on my phone. I typically don't need them because I'm up about every 45 minutes to an hour anyway. But here's a couple of easy items to order online. Remember that ergonomics also involves heat, light, and vision. Ergonomics is not just about sitting in a workstation from an office perspective. There are certain types of glasses. Bono knows the best, of course. He loves his orange glasses, and he's always known that they are a filter for blue light, which is good. There are special things that can be wrapped around fluorescent bulbs to reduce certain types of glare. All sorts of awareness can come about from your research on it. I've got some exercises here and some other stuff. Remember that the basics for setting up the workstation, pretty simple. It's not complicated. Get that seat done right. And then everybody on the call, there were 60+% of you that were sitting down. What I'd like you to do is, you could see this picture here where the woman is resting her arms at her side. Can you take 5 seconds and just put your arms down at your side? I know you might be keying, you may be looking up things on your phone right now. I'd just like you to put your arms down at your side and let them hang just for 5 to 10 seconds. I want you to tell me how that feels. Well, you don't have to tell me, just send me a mental thought. You just sit for a moment, arms at their side. We did not come out of the womb in the position here on the left. We weren't born this way. We probably came out like this, or some of you probably came out with like you were diving out. There are many ways that you're born, but it wasn't in an ergonomic position at a keyboard. So take that every hour and let those arms drop by your side. It'll be remarkable how it releases the muscles and the tension. Remember, all of the factors that come along with smartphones and tablets. It's really tough to deal with ergonomics in these cases, but you really got to work hard at it and practice at it. It doesn't come easy. Let's look at some damage that's being done by texting and by tablet work. And let's take a look at what Surgical Technology International talked about with the weight of texting and the degree of angle that happens on your neck and the weight that's put on your cervical area. Early on, that we talked about the study where the horns are growing on the bottom parts of the skull of people using, quote, cell phones. If there is any impact, it's probably due to some sort of posture. I think there's got to be a lot more research to determine if that's really happening. But take a look at these weights that are actually happening here on the neck with posture and with texting and or using a tablet. And maybe none of you on this call are guilty of any of this texting problem at all. Maybe all of you practice by holding your phone up with your arms and taking breaks, texting in that manner and not bending your neck down. If you're doing that, you are steps ahead of everybody. But it would be great if you can move in this direction to work on how to do texting and take a look at the damage that gets done after just maybe even just a few minutes of texting. Lastly, I want to cover lifting because that's a really simple one. Back injuries occur in the office environment at rates that mimic other types of jobs, and that could be because that going to get those large reams of paper, getting the water bottles and putting them inside the cooler, doing things that are not necessary. Remember to keep it really simple and lift like a baby. Those of you who've seen my slides before know that that's kind of critical. We, as children, will squat down when we go to lift something up and use perfect posture, absolutely perfect posture. But as we get older, we start to cheat. We bend over at the waist, and that's when we start to have some problems. There are some individual injury factors. Some of you have seen them before. These are factors that can impact our ergonomics, our health, our work in sedentary jobs or in jobs that are highly active. So first of all, women have found a higher incidence of musculoskeletal disorders in women. Those of you who've heard me before, most of the time women will say that's because they work harder than men. I'm not disputing that. Cigarette smoking, they think because of the nicotine causes perhaps a constriction of the blood vessels in certain areas of the body, and if you have an area of the body that's predisposed, like in the lower back or otherwise, to injury, that smoking may cause a problem there because you're getting a lack of oxygen to the area. Strength, for those that are weaker, that means that in the U.S., that women traditionally should, according to government statistics, be able to lift 30 to 35 pounds over their head. Men should be able to lift between 60 and 75 pounds over their head. For those people that cannot lift that weight over their head, they didn't do a study on how big a person was. They didn't get that far. Those that were weaker, typically of average size and weight, had a much higher incidence of musculoskeletal injuries. Sometimes you can't do anything about anthropometry, your height, maybe weight, body mass index. Some of these things, though, you can't do anything about. And then a lack of physical activity, or those that with extra physical activity, think a baseball player, football player throwing with their right arm, pitcher pitching with their right arm all the time. That's an overuse syndrome. We use mouse devices, and many people that we go to do ergonomics evaluations for have used their mouse for, the last 10 years with their right hand only. Think about alternating that between the right and the left hand. So we had a great session today. Deb, I want to thank everyone for being here, and I'll take any questions, of course, but I would love to run our last question about how people feel about today's webinar. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you, Deb, for being here today, and I want to thank our great audience for participating in today's webinar and being a part of a great series. So thank you so much. You'll receive an email after this that will provide all these materials and the links for references, etc. And by all means, Deb, I think that others are more than welcome to reach out and send us an email if necessary.
Absolutely. And Steve, everybody today rated the session either very good or good, and most people say very good. So thank you for your help today. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. And thank you, Steve Thompson, for your time and expertise today. We hope all of the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. And be sure to join us on July 16th for exempt and non-exempt employees. Thank you, everyone, and have a very safe day.